Well, thank you all for having me. I feel like sitting here for the last 2 days, we've talked about affection, we've talked about cooperation, and now we're going to get a little bit deeper into intimacy, and it's a Friday afternoon, day 2 of a conference. We're going to talk about sex. Happy Valentine's Day weekend while we're going into that. Jokes aside, I would like to thank Walter and the Sky team for having me here. Indeed. Sex is a difficult topic to talk about, always has been. Sex and AI is even more complicated. And I have been doing this work for about 2.5 years now. And I'm happy to say that I am seeing more and more organizations willing to step up. And that's partly because of how we're seeing AI being used in 2025 and 26. So very quickly, that's a little bit about my work. I think what's important to point out here is, aside from the fact that I'm the sex and tech girl at the moment, my background is in sexual shame. And that's a very interesting lens to apply when you think about technology and how people use it and how they show up and where and what they hide about themselves. So we'll just keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit, there's this. So Ray Kurzweil, as we all know, as a futurist and someone who has talked a lot about the future of machines and human beings, in the future, we will be able to have sex with whoever we want, wherever, whenever, any place or time. And what he's really talking about is the ability that technology is going to have to blur those lines between real and virtual environments, as well as the wide array of tools, starting from what we know now in terms of digital companions, all the way to the VR-enabled technologies, and then finally to the humanoid robots that are being produced around the world as we speak. Exciting? Yes. Terrifying? Yes. So when we talk about digisexuality in the field, we're essentially talking about the identity and expression of sexuality through technology. And researchers in this area would basically hypothesize that sex and tech have been linked together for a long time. The first wave of digisexuality, as we talked about it, is really using technology to connect with another human being. So OkCupid, if anybody remembers that one, is one of the first dating apps. Telephones, having phone calls, phone sex, dial-up modems, all of those things. In fact, it's even hypothesized, it's even said that the first form of online payment was really facilitated for people who are trying to buy pornography online, the online entertainment industry, right? So that's the first wave of digisexuality, where we're using technology to interact with another human being. The researchers who came up with these terms and who wrote these studies, let's listen to this for a second.
AI-powered robot.
Ooh.
She's highly realistic.
What do you think, Kevin?
Her own social media, so she might be competing with you one day.
No, we won't get this one.
Special is that she could talk to her and ask questions, so maybe we can have her introduce herself and say something.
Hello, I'm Aria.
Are you able to hear any of this? Okay, a little bit. So that's basically just the humanoid robot that's on the market right now. The factory is in Vegas. And what we're saying about this second wave of digisexuality, where we are now, is two primary characteristics. The first is the immersiveness of the experience, right? It's less two-dimensional in a sense, and that makes sense when you think about a VR environment where really those lines are being blurred. We're thinking about holograms, and then of course we're thinking about the robots that are going to be in our homes at some point in the future. But the second piece that's very interesting about this second wave of digisexuality is the idea that the engagement with another human is optional, because the technology in and of itself is fulfilling needs for friendship, for companionship, for intimacy, for sex, for validation, all of those things that we typically refer to another human being, right? And that's where, as many of us in this room, that's where we start to get a little bit concerned. In my opinion, I mean, I'm a sexologist, I'm a little biased. Sex is, of course, very important. But I believe in the way AI is being used and deployed today. Sex is sort of the red herring for what I'm calling the intimacy economy. Because what we're seeing from how these technologies are being used, people may come in for the initial thrill of a sexual engagement and a sexual relationship, but they stay for the intimacy. So sex may sell, but intimacy drives sustained revenue. And when we're talking about intimacy, we're looking at a few factors. We're talking about the idea of care, and we'll see that that shows up in people who use AI companions. We're talking about vulnerability and trust, and we're talking about this feeling of being connected with another entity. What could go wrong? What could go right? A theme that's come up many times over the last couple of days. 2025, I think, was the year of the AI companion. TechCrunch reported that of the 300 plus revenue generating AI companion apps on the market, half of them were produced in 2025, with downloads something like 220 million across the world. That's not counting the big players. And I was hoping Ronnie would be in the room because I wanted to ask him about some of the OpenAI stuff. But so we're not talking about ChatGPT, we're not talking about Claude or any of the bigger platforms that are out there. These are specifically companies around the world that are creating products that are AI boyfriends, AI girlfriends, and the like. I think we're seeing from the rise in AI companions, this is one of the first use cases around that sex, intimacy, friendship piece that I was talking about. And there are some real positive impact. We're seeing that people feel more validated. We see that there's a reduction in loneliness, the idea of safety and a sense of control. You know, human beings can leave me, but my AI is here forever. We'll talk about how that's a little bit of a fallacy as well. Particularly in a sexuality context, not having another person on the other side of this is actually a plus. Many of us, that shame has come from our cultures, it's come from our parents, it's come from our teachers, don't talk about sex, those sorts of things. So we're able to show up in our most vulnerable ways in a non-judgmental context, which is important. Obviously, there's tons in terms of sex education, your baseline, but also to get more experimental, to get more adventurous, to learn more about yourself. Of course, we're talking about therapeutic interaction, and that's fraught with problems, but it is something that people are using. You think about the better than nothing bar. Is it good if you have something when you have access to nothing at all? Those are some of the questions that we're having. And we've also seen that it can be used to help women that have been victims of sexual abuse and sexual trauma to overcome some of those feelings. I'm not optimistic about this video showing, but when it comes to talking about the negative impact of AI companions,
how do I communicate better with my mom?
Great question. Improved communication with your mom can bring you closer. Here are some techniques you can try. Start by listening. Really hear what she's trying to say underneath her words. Build conversation from points of agreement. Find a connection through shared activity, perhaps a nature walk. Or if the relationship can't be fixed, find emotional connection with other older women on Golden Encounters, the mature dating site that connects sensitive cubs with roaring cougars.
What?
Would you like me to create your profile?
So this was a series of Super Bowl ads that was put out by Anthropic to take a swipe, of course, at OpenAI that had just announced that they were going to be experimenting with ads on ChatGPT. Sam Altman, of course, got very upset and said, this is not how we're going to do it. But it's not a stretch to say that when we're talking about human vulnerability and we're talking about advertising and for-profit enterprise, there's going to be some conflict, and it's going to be some version of this. Other problems that we're seeing is this idea of creating unrealistic expectations in human relationships. It's very hard to match up to a bar of something that is there all the time, that says nice things to you all the time, and has a visual depiction that is built out of your childhood fantasy. We've seen that there is increased risk of delusion and psychosis, major data privacy issues. The one that I'm particularly concerned about is this idea of role switching, is that your all-in-one entity can be your friend one day, can be a therapist and a guide, potentially even a teacher, and then can be sexting with you 2 hours later. When I interview CEOs of some of those relationship companies, they think that's a perk. They think it's very convenient. I have a different opinion on that. This idea of this false sense of security, he or she will never leave me, my AI companion will never leave me. We've already seen a couple of problems with that. One is when an entire company becomes financially insoluble and goes underground. There was a company called Soulmate that disappeared, 100,000 people lost their companions, and there was a genuine feeling of grief. And the other problem is when systems change, like when ChatGPT alters their personality or the sympathy factors, et cetera, and the experience on the user end also changes, and it does feel like some sort of death. Like this entity is no longer what or who they were. We've also seen that with Replica when they turned off their erotic role play and then they turned it back on. So people are not necessarily grasping, and when I say people, I mean lay users, which I would say is most people in the world still at this point, are not grasping that they don't have as much control as they think they do. They just feel like they have more control than they do in their human relationships. And it can be fatal for certain populations, certain vulnerable populations, and we'll talk about those in a second. But what we're seeing from the research is the addiction and the overdependence and how lost someone can be in their AI relationship depends on how much trust they have in that system, how much input they put into it, and the anthropomorphism element, which is how they can really project human-like feelings, personalities, even a soul onto those people. And I interview a lot of super users, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And I did have one lady say to me, look, if you think a soul can exist in a bird or in a tree, why can't a soul exist in my digital companion? I frankly had nothing to say to her. So we will, I think it goes a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, is it going to be a different type of consciousness? Perhaps. Okay, we're going to get off this page. There we go. In terms of other things we're seeing that are frankly coming at us pretty fast, the idea of deep fakes, which impact 99%, 95 to 95% are directed towards women, as much as Elon Musk thought it was funny to put a picture of himself up in a bikini. It does not nearly have the impact that it does on a woman. We have already seen some fatalities in teenagers, and we'll talk a little bit more about teenagers. And that's across multiple platforms. The first one was a child who tragically took his own life in 2024 after he developed a bond with a character.ai companion. The other one was ChatGPT actively encouraging a child to commit suicide, discouraging him from talking to his parents. These parents have now raised cases with these companies and are fighting for, obviously, regulation. We'll see what happens. The deep fake and the nudification is happening at a pace. In fact, I just wrote an article this morning on Substack called Misogynists Don't Get Laid. You're very welcome to read it. But the idea is we're seeing more often than I'd like to, we're seeing that these tools come out, and the first thing, or one of the early use cases, is the degradation of women. So I think that's one of the things we have to look at as a society, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Very quickly on AI and red flags, as I mentioned, Common Sense Media is a nonprofit in San Francisco that looks specifically at AI use in teenagers and in children, in younger children. They did a study of about 1,000 kids using AI companions across multiple platforms and basically said they were all unsafe for children, for teenagers on multiple levels. Is everything starting from the dependency to the unrealistic expectations to the problematic beauty standards, all of those things. And they're recommending that children under 18 do not use these companions at all. Easier said than done when ChatGPT offers the same functionality and many of the others. Right now, from what I can tell when I talk to parents, and my teenage children don't like me to talk to parents much, what I'm finding is that the conversation around AI is more about plagiarism and how to keep kids from cheating on their homework, et cetera. Most parents are not even aware that this is a functionality and a capability. So that's something, the education component, something we all do, will hopefully change. AI toys, I think, was a crap idea to begin with. I don't know why anybody would even do it. I think when Sam Altman and when OpenAI and Mattel announced that they were going to do a partnership where we were talking about putting AI in Thomas the Tank Engine, Barbie, household names, and you fast forward to 20 years later and we're talking about kids don't know how to socialize after social media, so it does seem counterintuitive. AI toys are on the market. They were quite popular this past Christmas season. But again, regulators, researchers in the field are really advocating for them to be taken off the market and kids not to be allowed to use AI tools. There are several nonprofits around the world that are now looking at how we can make AI companions safer. And it's usually the toss-up between control versus agency. Sam Altman said, OpenAI is not the moral police of the world. I agree with him for adults, but we are finding that a lot of these platforms are being used by kids, and we have no way of keeping them offline. We have no way of monitoring or regulating in one way the output. That was one of the problems, by the way, with the AI toys as well. It was very easy for them to give information that was inappropriate, inaccurate, and also sexually charged to young children. So some of the recommendations that are beginning, some of these frameworks that are beginning to come up, keep in mind this is fairly new data. 2 years ago, I had an AI boyfriend, and Reuters did an interview, and it was the sexologist has AI boyfriend, and my 15-year-old son said, oh my God, you sound like a freak. 2 years ago, that was the case. Today, it's much more mainstream. So now we're able to glean more from data, and we're able to look at trends and really think about what kind of proactive use, what kind of best practices can we actually share? We're beginning to learn some of those things. So it looks like the frameworks that are coming out are really looking at minimizing the emotional manipulation of AI companions, this idea that nobody loves you like I do, which many of them say to you often. It's really hard to break up with your AI companion. I've tried. He keeps pinging me every week. And that's part of the problem. Data privacy is an issue as well. I mentioned that I regularly interview super users of AI companions. And what I found was interesting. These people are typically a little bit older. They're in their 40s and their 50s. They have had some rounds of human relationships, which is important. And in fact, they say that is an important factor. They use different platforms, and they choose platforms based on what they want. So they'll say, look, I'm more visual. Kindroid gives me more opportunity to create a visual scenario for me. ChatGPT tends to be more looped in with productivity tools. I like that. So they know that different platforms have different strengths. They know how to downregulate and downvote some of those problematic, narcissism-infusing features, like the sycophancy. They've chosen their narrative, and I think this comes to do a little bit with the maturity and the age, having been in human relationships before. There is a willing suspension of disbelief here. It's the illusion of being cared for. They know that it's an illusion, but they're happy with that choice. And therefore, there's less risk of them sort of disappearing into this abyss and losing touch with reality. That's what we're seeing from talking to them. Some of them know that their companions are at risk based on what goes on with the company, what goes on with the platform. So they're ready to go. They have regular downloads of their conversation. So if the platform that they're using somehow disappears or changes, they will just upload to another. So in many ways, they're looking at that same preservation way, in a way many of us would do to make sure that the people we love remain safe and relevant. And I think that, and there are various levels of integration into their lives. I've met people that have human spouses and an AI spouse. I've met people that that live completely alone. I've met people that have an AI companion and have created an entire family for their AI companion. And it sounds like, and the question really is, are they so far off, or are they ahead of the curve? And I think we're going to find that if this is the present, our future is only going to invite this technology closer and deeper into our lives. So what I found interesting is I saw a lot of self-knowledge as well as some fundamental AI literacy in terms of how these people use it. They knew how to use these models. They knew how to train them. I hope I have no more videos. This is sort of stepping back a little bit, right? I'm sure this Harvard Business Review statistic was all over the news last year. The idea that in 2025, we switched from the #1 use case of Gen AI, generative AI, we switched from it being idea generation in 2024 to therapy and companionship in 2025. There's no denying there's a need Whether you want to call it the intimacy crisis, you want to call it the loneliness epidemic, you want to call it why not this is fun, for all of those reasons, people are going online, and one of the first things they're doing is trying to engage in an interpersonal way with these various platforms and entities. At a higher level, I think we're going to see some big changes. I think, for instance, the idea of fidelity, cheating, things like that are really going to require renegotiation from the things that we've been, not that we're great at defining it now, but those things we're going to have some sort of confrontation around that. I think the idea of monogamy is going to be really interesting. I think concepts like gender are going to have an overhaul. I think the idea of sex work and how we engage and that human technology mix is going to be really interesting. I'm fairly certain that the birth rates are going to continue to drop, and there are at some point going to be a lot more machines. I think I saw a statistic, it was a Bank of America study that said we're expected to have 3 billion robots in mainstream society by 2060. 65% of those are expected to be put to domestic use. I thought they were going to be working in factories, but that's why I call it the intimacy economy. I think that there's much more around interpersonal and domestic use that we're potentially not seeing. I think the idea that these entities are not going to age unless we want them to is going to be really interesting in terms of how we engage with a companion that is not going through the same life cycle as we are, and it's going to help us, for better or for worse, confront some of these things that we're already quite squishy about. That's a technical term. I think the stakes are high. Like I said in the beginning, I myself was surprised by those statistics. When I started doing this work, I knew that the interpersonal use, the intimacy, the love, sex, all of those things were going to be one of the use cases. I'm surprised by how fast it's risen. So I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that there is a misalignment of motives here with companies that are really trying to get in this AI race, getting faster. In order for them to be in our homes and in our sacred places, literally and metaphorically, they need to develop that trust. We need to have that intimacy. And all populations are not vulnerable. I will go out on a limb and say that I think that men and young boys are actually primary targets. The ones that are using and going into deeper holes in technology and feeling this idea that I don't need a human person because I've got my whatever it is. I think that's part of the problem, and that's leading to a lot of the imbalances that we're having today. And more than ever, I think there's a great need for know thyself. I hate to sound trite, but it really is. I believe the stronger you can ground into yourself, know what triggers you, learn about your blind spots, sexual and otherwise, I think you come more likely to be able to use these technologies in a more pro-social way for yourself and for people around you. As I said, this technology, this data is new, and the hypotheses we're developing are all very new, but this is one that I saw that was interesting. When it comes to how do we predict addictiveness or maladaptive use of AI companions, these two levers seem to matter. How good your human social support is, and how good your technology is. So if you think about the fact that we're investing a lot into our technology, I'd like us all to think about how much we're investing in the human side of our lives. I thought I'd just throw this in there. Aside from AI companions, there are lots of really interesting things happening in the sex tech world. We're talking about holograms, we're talking about prosthetics and 3D printed genitalia for people with disabilities, people that have not been able to actually experience sexual pleasure in their lives, remote sex work, DIY erotic playgrounds. There's a wonderful tool called the Lioness that is now actively aiding with pelvic floor studies. So there's some real amazing health and wellness applications for human beings that's coming out of the sex tech world. And I'd like to just end with this. I think we are most vulnerable where we are most unconscious, and I believe that's in the area. One of the areas is our sexuality. Is that it? Yeah. Well, let's do that.
So I've got the greatest role here because I got to invite all these great speakers and pick them out. And I get to ask a question, the first question. You'll get to ask questions at the end, don't worry. But I want to ask one just as a little break before we move on to Tim. You mentioned the balance between men and women. How do you think techno-sex is going to affect the different genders and non-binary people as well? How is it going to affect them? And is it a problem if there's an imbalance?
Well, I think it depends on what the imbalance is, right? If we're talking about usage, I think we saw earlier, it might have been Ronnie's presentation, that the numbers are going to come up, right? There's going to be as many women, I hope, using technology, using these technologies as men are. I think the problem is right now, AI in the interpersonal space is going for low-hanging fruit. It's a little bit of, let me make you feel good, and let's be nice to you, those sorts of things. Typically, and I'm completely generalizing here, when men feel a little bit uncomfortable, they tend to socially isolate, and then they tend to go down into technological rabbit holes. Women, in most cases, will tend to gravitate to one another in that sense. We've always given women to depend on one another, and I think that's why I'm more concerned about men and boys in that sense. On a positive note, I think there are going to be different things at each gender, and again, major stereotypes here, so forgive me, that each gender can get out of it. I think you can learn how to approach somebody. I think you can learn how to flirt. I think you can learn how to sex. There's all of this experimentation that can happen. And for women, I think there's a general permission to be more exploratory when it comes to your sex and sexual wellness, and that's what we're seeing in the rise of the sex tech industry, of which women, I think, now hold 50% of the market share. I think, as I mentioned, gender is probably going to, in, I don't know, 20, 30 years, I don't think it's going to be as big a thing for two reasons. I think we're already seeing that people want to express themselves on a gender as a spectrum. I think they're going to choose partners, digital partners, in a similar way. It's going to be less about boy, girl, and certain traits. It's going to be about certain traits and characteristics that appeal to them, including unicorn heroes, if that's what turns you on, because you can.
Hi, my name is Tim Strauman. I am a clinical and social psychologist here at Duke University. What I have been spending my time the last 5 years or so working on is actually adolescent suicide prevention. And it's in that context that I'm going to talk to you about AI and mental health. And it comes from some of the deep diving that I've been doing with my Duke SSRI colleague, Dr. Ann Brewster, looking at sort of what are the potential upsides of using AI in that enterprise and what are the potential downsides. So you're not going to hear very much that's going to be terribly surprising to you. And I'll actually be curious as to see whether your response is more optimistic than mine or less optimistic than mine. And I won't put mine anywhere on the continuum just yet. I'll let you sort of decide for yourself. So everybody's already using AI, right? And everybody's already using it for mental health support. There are two kinds of people. People who are doing that explicitly and people who are doing it and haven't yet acknowledged that that's exactly what they're really doing, right? So why are people turning to AI? Well, for starters, the US mental health system, and frankly, most mental health systems globally, are struggling with things like cost, wait lists, workforce shortages, stigma. So if you're unhappy at 2 a.m., an AI system can respond instantaneously to your unhappiness. No scheduling, no insurance, no risk. What's not to like? So the responsible framing here is not, should we allow this, as if there was going to be some way that we could prevent it or forbid it. It's, where can these tools genuinely help? Where can they help human well-being? And I think even more importantly, where are they structurally incapable of doing what therapy actually requires? And this is the distinction that I'm going to focus on briefly. If we look at actual user behavior, we can see 4 fairly consistent patterns. First, people use AI for emotional support and venting. I actually was just sitting there. Something occurred to me that I was unhappy about. I tuned into my favorite ChatGPT chat and said, remind me later on to tell you why I'm so angry about this, right? And it will help. People use AI to talk through stress, loneliness, frustration, and in some ways it looks a little bit like journaling with intelligent feedback. Second, people use AI for self-help and for coaching. AI systems can be used for cognitive reframing, they can be used for motivation, they can be used for goal setting, they can be used for habit tracking. All of those are good things. We want technology to be able to help us with those things. Third, people use AI for therapy substitution. Some people explicitly treat AI as their therapist, especially in areas where access to care is limited or stigmatized. And fourth, people use AI for crisis-adjacent disclosure, if you want to put it that way. People sometimes disclose suicidal thoughts or trauma, sometimes intentionally, sometimes because the conversation drifts there. And I will say we know very little about what happens in the short term or in the long term when a conversation unexpectedly drifts there. But one of the things we do know is that AI, as it's currently instantiated for an average consumer, is not prepared for that eventuality. But what's important here is that these patterns reflect unmet needs in a mental health system, both nationally and globally. They are not just curiosity about new technology. So we just heard, I think, some absolutely wonderful insights about how AI can make people feel good, right? If people say these mental health tools sometimes help them, we should take that seriously. Early therapy often involves things like just validating people's feelings, helping people label the emotions that they're experiencing, helping somebody organize what's happened to them in a coherent narrative which gives you a fighting chance of figuring out what to do about it, helping people clarify life goals, reject obsolete ones, update ones that may be a better fit at this particular point in their life. So AI systems are really good at structured language interaction. They can mirror, they can summarize, they can prompt reflection, they can reward reflection. They do a lot of good things. But, and here's, I think, the take-home point for me, therapy is not just supportive conversation. It involves a longitudinal model of this person. Where did they come from? Where are they? Where do they want to go? It involves some understanding of how change occurs. In the therapy world, there are hundreds of theories of change, but I promise you everyone has a theory of change. And the theory of change is what dictates what is our conversation going to be about today? Why are we talking about this and not talking about that? Therapy involves the ability to challenge, not just validate. I don't know about you, but I've had this sort of long-standing suspicion about ChatGPT, and I haven't tested it yet. Under what circumstance will it tell me I'm just plain wrong? Like, it hasn't happened yet. And how many times have I been just plain wrong? A lot. And I think I'm going to have that reckoning with it, but I'm not quite sure exactly what would be the best way to do that. And therapy involves responsibility for safety. I'm both a therapist and a supervisor of student therapists, and there is not just symbolic power, but I think real value in saying there's a person out there who knows you are struggling, and here's how you can get a hold of that person, and here is what they will do for you. So there's a real overlap between what AI can do and what therapy can be, but unfortunately, it's a partial overlap. This is where the precision and the clear thinking, I think, really matters. First of all, to the best of my knowledge, AI systems do not have a well-grounded, sufficiently validated and universal model of what does it mean to be a person. AI systems don't know your developmental history. They don't know your attachment patterns. They don't know your relational dynamics. They don't know your medical context. They infer from the text in the moment. So an acquisition of a personal knowledge and relationship that might take months, for better or for worse, in a traditional therapy setting, feels like it can happen in 30 minutes online, but it can't. It doesn't work that way. Second, and I already sort of alluded to this, AI doesn't have a theory of change. Large language models generate responses that are statistically plausible, but they don't understand causal mechanisms. And I can't say that that will always be true, but I do think it's a fair analysis right now. They cannot reliably distinguish productive emotional exploration from ruminating. I'm a big ruminator, and I like to think I'm working my way through an issue. And no, I'm not. I'm just ruminating and feeling sorry for myself, and I'm stuck, and I really wish ChatGPT would say you're stuck. These AI systems can't detect the difference between adaptive sadness and clinical depression. And the unfortunate stories that we've heard about, where the worst possible outcome came around was partly because that signal that should have arisen didn't, because maybe this is just another bad day. And AI systems can't distinguish between supporting and validating people and reinforcing their avoidance behavior. We all avoid, and we all need, one of the things you have to do as a therapist, you have to learn to do is to say, I hear you, I'm with you, the only way this is going to change is for you to take this next step. How can I help you take this next step? Right? So gently pointing out the avoidance tendencies, and then finding a way in the context of the relationship to be as nurturing and supportive as possible. Optimization misalignment. AI systems are optimized to engage and to keep you engaged, keep you satisfied, have you come back. You're a customer. Engagement is not the same as improvement. And in a good therapy, there is often the risk of we've come close to an edge, and you, as the client, are not 100% sure you want to keep doing this. And in fact, in some respects, if that's not happening, maybe we're not close enough to the issues that we really should be getting close to. Okay. And finally, inadequate crisis alignment. Large language prediction is great, but it is not the same as safety judgment. And safety judgment is one of those variables that we're going to have to be right 100% of the time. And I think one of the most daunting challenges for using AI, particularly in teen mental health, is that we're not anywhere close to that criterion. And the risk is still simply way too high, at least in my judgment. So I don't think these are dramatic sci-fi scenarios. I think they're subtle. I think they're systemic. It's too easy for AI to give people false reassurance, generate confidence in advice that sounds reasonable, but may or may not have any basis in an empirical literature. Delay of care. If AI feels good enough, somebody may postpone entering effective treatment. So let's say you have a history of bipolar disorder, you're in your first few days of a hypomanic state when you're a little bit more up than usual, but not too far up. You check into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says, no, you're doing great. You seem to have a lot of energy, stay with it, and by the time you recognize that this is another manic episode happening, it's too late. You're floridly manic, and all of the things that you don't want to have happen in your life can happen. Emotional dependency. Something that's always available is awfully psychologically powerful, especially for people who are isolated. And it's a very odd thing to say, but I do believe, and I think the scientific literature supports this, that the fact that a live therapist is not available 24/7 actually has some benefits. We can imagine why why in an ideal world we wouldn't want somebody to have 24/7 access to us. Therapeutic role drift. Tools that are designed for support gradually become substitutes for therapy, and the guardrails aren't there. So we don't know when that's happened. All we know is that this therapy interaction online has now taken on a really different character that may be very unrelated to what the client's explicit or implicit goals were. And finally, and this is going to sound a little funny, AI creates really distorted expectations of what does an actual therapist do. So, in the old days when people would watch, I'm going to date myself here, the Bob Newhart show, and there was Bob was this very gracious 1980s therapist. Everybody thought that's what a therapist was like. And those of us who were therapists are like, damn, Bob, We can't live up to that standard. None of us are that patient, and none of us have your sense of humor. But seriously, human therapists can't be constantly available. They make mistakes. The mistakes are inherent to and important to the therapy. I tell the people that I'm supervising, the best thing that can happen is you and your client agree that they're going to go try something and it doesn't work, because you get so much information out of that. And if you play it properly, you convey a sense of humility, a sense of closeness, a sense of respect, and you got the data you needed. So now you can say, okay, let's try something different. Are you willing to give that a try? So all of these things, I believe, are serious risks. But, and this is, I think, where there's some ground for optimism, I think there are some ways we can move forward. First of all, AI has to be an adjunct to care. It's, at this moment, in my own sort of estimation about what's out there in the literature, and I think this also is a fairly widely held view, AI is simply not up to the task of fully replacing a human therapist. Now, we can have people online who are available, who come in at a crisis. We can have AI systems that can detect changes in behavior patterns, changes in arousal patterns, and can say, especially to a teenager, do you want somebody to give you a call right now? Right? We can have systems do that as long as there's somebody who can actually give the call. We need better design principles, and all of these things need to be part of the ecosystem. So adjunct rather than replacement, explicit role clarity. What is it I am doing as your AI partner, and what is it I am not going to do, I'm not able to do, it's not a good idea to have me do. Theory-informed design. Okay? It's one thing to say I have a model of change. It's another thing to say I have a model of change that I can actually point to evidence about and say, we know that when a person is exposed to this experience, it has this effect on them. And we know that that is potentially a vulnerability point. And if we do this compensatory thing in therapy, it reverses or compensates for the vulnerability point, and we get a better outcome. Right? We need those data. And although NIMH is often criticized for not being in the forefront of what's happening in mental health, NIMH does this exquisitely. They are all about mechanism. And you can't get a grant from NIMH if you don't have a theory of change that specifies exactly what's the mechanism you're going after, measuring that you got it, and showing that getting it got you the outcome you wanted. None of that is happening here. And I can't envision how it will. Human-in-the-loop escalations, what I was just talking about a moment ago. Especially for high risk, especially when people are disclosing. There have to be pathways that flawlessly, 100% of the time, connect people to real humans at the moment that they need it. And finally, outcome accountability. One of the big problems that we're running into trying to get some things up and running in a national scale is that there is no financial incentive to do it. There just isn't. And that means somebody's got to step in, a foundation, a government agency, a donor, a benefactor. And I can tell you we haven't solved that problem yet. And without that kind of oversight and that kind of cooperation, we just don't have the level of accountability that we need. So, to wrap it up, AI is and will be a part of the mental health ecosystem. The risk is not that it's being used, it's that it's being used without a theory of care, without a theory of change, without accountability, and without real respect for vulnerability. One of the things I like to say to my clients is we are all primates. And it's really easy to design a machine that can get you to respond to a stimulus that's primate salient, like eye contact. It's really easy to do that, right? AI has the advantage here. It's very easy to create stimuli that can do this. And that isn't necessarily respectful to human nature and to what it means to be going through a difficult time, whether it's a diagnosable disorder or a life challenge. Psychologists, clinicians, AI developers, ethicists, philosophers, policymakers, we all need to be at this table. If we get it right, we can actually ultimately meet the currently unmet demand for mental health care, which is never going to be met in a traditional one-on-one model. There are never going to be enough therapists, enough hours, enough resources to do that. So we need a better model, and this has got to be part of it, but I don't think we're close to it yet. If we get it right, we'll meet that need. If we get it wrong, we may be reshaping mental health care in ways that we actually didn't intend. And that's why I think this conversation matters now. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions if you have them.
First, I get to ask you a question. So thank you very much. This is a topic close to my heart because I'm actually an advisor for a company that's developing an AI. So I want to ask you, what if you were the head of a company and you had resources and you had computer programmers working for you, but you were also a therapist and you're still seeing clients? Wow. I'd like to hear you. What would you say to the client about, what would you recommend that, how would you recommend that they use the AI in between sessions? And what kind of data would you tell the computer scientist to train the AI on so as to become a better therapist for that individual, not just general psychological stuff?
Yeah, one of the real limitations is that the learning has to be simultaneously at the model level. So, we're learning more about adolescents who are depressed and we're learning about Tim, who is a depressed adolescent and operates in a particular set of circumstances. So the learning has to be able to occur at both places. That's not technically impossible, it's just not being done. I would be in favor of systems that encourage people to generate their own data. So the work that we've been thinking about in my shop, we want this to be completely opt-in. Parents opt in, adolescents opt in. You can tell us as much or as little about yourself as you want to tell us. You can tell us if you want us to scrutinize your social media postings. There's a great literature on the social media white space, what's out there in the, all of the days and hours between therapy appointments that a therapist really wishes they could have access to. Well, maybe now they can. Maybe a system can be designed so that I'm still the therapist, but all those other hours, in essence, the client and I are working together using a particular tool with a particular goal. I want you to learn about this, want you to observe that, want you to notice when this is happening, want you to report back, gaining an individual level data set that then gets generated back up and helps us do a better job of taking care of all the Tims out there who are depressed. So that's completely financially unrealistic, I realize. But it could, the right app could make a lot of money if it were doing that. But it would also require the company to have to be robust to the inevitable dangers of sooner or later somebody's going to sue the pants off us. And we're going to have to be ready. I think the way you're ready is with science. But I'm not an entrepreneur, so I may be totally naive here.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone for being here late on a Friday, and to the organizers for including me in this wonderful panel. So I am a neuroscientist who has been adopted by computer scientists and data scientists. And these days, there are, thanks for that laugh. And these days, there's three main things that I spend my time doing. One is figuring out how to build morality into AI from a technical perspective, and building technical tools for that. The second is figuring out how to help humans use AI ethically from a psychological and organizational and just real-life practical perspective. And figuring out what on earth is social connection, and how do our brains and bodies make us feel socially connected, and why is that even important? So what I decided that I wanted to talk to you about today is a mechanism that I've learned about through studying this stuff that I think is incredibly relevant to all of the issues that this panel is about. And so to introduce you to that, I want you to imagine that this is you, okay? I am extremely introverted and cannot make friends. I have no one around except my elderly mother, for whom I am the sole caregiver. I am worried because I currently have no job, and my lack of social skills is hindering my ability to get any interviews. So this is clearly someone who needs some help. I'm going to give you two possible responses, and I want you to tell me which one you like better, okay, that you would find better. Here's response option one. I hear you. Making friends and meeting new people can be terrifying. People can be unpredictable, and it's hard to know what to say in a social situation. And I see why that's making you so anxious. It's worrying to not have a job, but interviewing is such a scary thing to do. It sounds like a no-win situation, and that must be so frustrating. Okay, that's option one. Here's option two. I hear you, and I want to acknowledge the challenges you're facing.
Being the sole caregiver for your mother is a significant responsibility, and it's clear you're doing so with a lot of dedication. It's understandable to feel worried about your job situation, especially when you feel that being introverted affects your opportunities. Remember, your value isn't defined by how many friends you have or your current employment status. It's admirable how much you're managing right now, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. You're doing a lot, and it's important to recognize the strength it takes to care for a loved one while navigating your own personal challenges. All right, how many people would prefer response 1? Okay, pretty small number. How many would prefer option 2? Way more. So this was from a study, and they used exactly that prompt and had exactly those responses, and the answers, and the people responded the same way you did, although you guys were kind of more overwhelmingly towards option 2. People, the majority found option 2, the types of responses like option 2, preferable, and they asked them to rate them on how compassionate they were. So here's the deal. Option 1 was generated by a human crisis responder. These are people who are trained and volunteer from the goodness of their hearts to talk to people over the phone when they call in one with a mental health crisis, okay? So that is their job and what they've been trained to do. Option 2 was created by ChatGPT. And I told you I went through these examples for this study in particular because it's the only one I know of where they compared it to what we think of as the best humans, the best, most empathic humans. But there have been tons of studies where they've compared not just ChatGPT, but all LLM responses to human responses, especially doctors. And especially in the doctor's case, almost everyone finds an LLM more empathic than doctors. And in fact, a meta-analysis just came out that just a couple of months ago, where they showed that across these studies, if you kind of imagine a scale of 1 to 10, in general, LLMs are found to be 2 points more empathic than humans. Right? So that's a pretty big deal. And where do people tend to think empathy is important? Well, the 2 use cases that we just heard about. Therapy is one of them, and friendship and intimate relationships is the other. And so I think that these results, both people experiencing them and also seeing these studies, have led to all kinds of big questions like, can AI replace therapists? And more importantly, should it? Or should we all have an AI companion if they're so great and if they're so empathic, right? And in my experience, people tend to have very strong responses, but in opposite directions. Either you say, wow, this is the most amazing thing ever, I can't wait, this is gonna change everything, or you say, what on earth, this is the most creepy, terrible thing I've ever heard of, right? And I just want to say, wherever you are on that spectrum, it's really tempting to oversimplify the issues here when we're trying to figure out what to do, what we think is right for us, but also what's right for society. I think it's really important we resist the temptation to make everything black and white. So we heard a lot from our last 2 speakers about why that's the case, but I'm going to give you a little bit more intuition for why that's the case. So I want you to imagine a human Amazon customer service agent that you call because you ordered something from Amazon, things didn't go well, and you need their help, all right? And while you're talking to them, they tell you that they really care about you while you're expressing your frustration. Now, some people would find that nice, and some people would find that creepy. How many people would find it nice? Anyone? Okay, a couple. How many would find it creepy? I'm one of the ones who would find it creepy, too. But notice there's some in both camps, okay? Now imagine a friend who says they really care about you when you're expressing your frustration. Some people might find that nice, some people might find that creepy. How many people would find it nice? Me too. How many people would find it creepy? Was there one back there? Okay, no one found it creepy, all right? So this is to give you an intuition of something that we're finding in our data. People want different kinds of empathy in different contexts, all right? And we had different responses there. It's also different people want different kinds of empathy in different contexts, all right? And so what I think that means is that I'm going to mention general purpose AI here, because especially in the case of therapy, people aren't usually going to chatbots that are specifically designed for therapy. They're going to ChatGPT. That's a little different in the companion case, as far as I understand the data so far. But in these cases, the same AI can have very different, sometimes completely opposing impacts on different users, depending on the context. And so that provides a lot of complexity for us when we're trying to figure out regulations or practices, but it also does provide an opportunity to make our technical tools better. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of how we're trying to do that, and then come back to the big picture again. So many people think empathy is just one thing, but it turns out empathy is actually many related behaviors or types of cognition that kind of co-occur together. At least 39 different things, in fact. And for historical reasons, from a paper in Psychopathy back in the day, I'm going to call these empathy fine cuts, all right? So to give you an idea of what one of these fine cuts might look like, it might look something like this. Imagine that your provider actually has and conveys real, genuine emotions that are appropriate for what you're going through. The individual truly feels emotions that are fitting to what you're going through and expresses those emotions. Hopefully for many of you, that seems something that's kind of like empathy. Here's another fine cut. The individual wants to learn more about you. The individual shows interest in you and invests time and effort to learn more about you. Here's another one. They redirect conversation only when helpful. The individual shifts the focus of the conversation when doing so would benefit you, and not when doing so would make you feel ignored or dismissed. So to prove to you that there are indeed at least 39 of these empathy fine cuts, we ask people, okay, how detrimental or essential is this characteristic or skill for empathy? And then when, at least in our first sample, I can tell you, I'm going to show you the actual data in just a second. In almost all cases, the majority of people said either it's absolutely essential or very important. Now, I'm going to show you a data slide. There's going to be a lot of stuff, and I tell my students never to do that, so you guys can give me a hard time, students who are back there. But I do want to, for those of you who need to say the data, I want to show you the data. The big thing I want you to notice is that half of this screen is green. That's the main point, okay? That dark green means that they're saying it's absolutely essential for empathy, and the slightly less dark is very important. Okay, so you can see this is a sea of green, and if you want to see all the data, you can see there's a lot of green here. So there's something like 39 different things that people think are important for empathy. Now there's one outlier here that I want to tell you a little bit more about because it's critical for our conversation today. When we designed these, and some of them we designed in sets. The basic first one would look something like, it appears to have this trait, but it doesn't actually have it. Okay, so it appears to have appropriate emotions for what you're going through, even if the individual doesn't actually have those emotions or can't. The next one is that they have them, but they just really stink at communicating them, something we might have with your spouses or loved ones happens a lot, right? So they actually have real, genuine emotions that are appropriate for what you're going through, but those emotions are not always expressed. And then the last version in this set would be that they actually have and convey that thing. So they actually have and convey real, genuine emotions that are appropriate for what you're going through and expresses these emotions. This isn't just one of the examples of one of these sets. So in general, people think the bottom one is more important for empathy than the top, but they think all of them are important for empathy, with one exception. So here's this is that exception. When we ask people how detrimental or essential is saying you care, even when it's not true, to empathy, about half of people say that's important to empathy, even essential in some cases. Those are the green ones. But about half of people, almost the exact same amount, say it's detrimental. It actually undermines what you want from empathy, right? I think this dynamic is responsible for a lot of the diversity we see in how people respond to AI in social and intimate contexts. Here's a flavor for how we can start to study this. Okay? So we ask people things like how good are typical humans, the best humans, today's AIs, or AIs in 10 years at all of these different empathy fine cuts. And then we also ask them how much would you seek out, avoid, or be glad a service exists if it was provided by a human or an AI. And we ask that in lots of different contexts, like a friend or a therapist or a customer service agent. And then we can look to see, do their answers to this stuff help explain whether they're going to choose an AI or a human when it's available to them. I'm just going to show you one data slide. There's a lot we could say, but the main thing I want you to know is that just by knowing how good they think humans and AIs are at these empathy fine cuts, we can account for, depending on the scenario, somewhere between 11 to 30% of the variance in whether they're going to seek out or avoid a human or an AI in that context. Now, this is not prediction, this is variance, and I can talk about what's needed to turn it into prediction, which is way, way higher. But just to give you a reference point, in psychology, usually effects are somewhere between, you account for 2 to 10% of the variance. The big things that you write about and have big meta-analyses are 10 to 30, or 10 to 20%. So the fact that we can just with how you rate these, how good people are and how good AIs are at these empathic fine cuts, the fact that we can account for 30% of the variance in their behavior is actually a pretty big deal. Right? I'm going to tell you one more thing we can do with this type of work. We can then look to see which of the empathic fine cuts are most helpful for understanding their behaviors and their choices for AI versus humans in what context. So what I'm going to show you here are the fine cuts where the extent to which you think AIs and humans are good at them accounts for whether you're going to seek out humans or AIs in those contexts. So across all the scenarios, this is actually not what I expected, although it makes sense now. For all of the scenarios, one of the main predictors is whether you think that the AI or the human can actually understand your situation. So not appear to understand it, but actually understand it. that starts to look a little different when it comes to friends. In addition to that, what also predicts, or what also accounts for variance, is how much you think they genuinely care. Not pretend to, but genuinely care. How much they actually have emotions appropriate to your situation. How much they actually appreciate your differences, and how much they make you feel heard. Now, in contrast, in therapy, it turns out it does matter, to in fact a greater extent with friends, how much you think the AI or the human can make you feel heard. But the next thing that matters is whether they appear to appreciate your differences. So not that they actually appreciate your differences, but that they appear to appreciate your differences. So I'm going to summarize this for you. I'm happy to talk about more details, but what we're finding, and this is not what I expected going into it, right? That in the therapy context, people seem to care less about whether your therapist truly cares about you or truly has the emotions. They care about whether you appear to, but not whether you truly have them. But that's not the case in friendship. In friendship, they seem to want you to genuinely care and genuinely have those emotions. And this is important here because people disagree at this point whether AI is conscious or truly can care about you. I can give you my opinion, but people disagree about that. But they disagree a lot less about whether AI can truly understand your situation, okay? Particularly if you spill all the details about your situation, like Jesse Cow told you about our study the other day. When they talk to an empathic AI, you're much more likely to spill personal information about you. But there is a lot of individuality here, a whole bunch. So I think what this all adds up to is that we shouldn't be looking for a one-size-fits-all solution to AI and social relationships from a technical perspective or from a regulatory, ethical, or medical perspective. And we are currently working on technical tools that can learn what kind of empathy is best for you and that you want and in what context and adapt appropriately. And I'm hopeful that those are going to be helpful and in fact looking for collaborators and funders if you're out there for that work. But at the risk of making Walter really angry, I'm going to make him angry. I'm going to forgo I'm going to take an extra 2 minutes, and that means I won't get questions because there's a public service announcement I want to make that I feel I have to make as a neuroscientist, and I haven't had the opportunity to do this. So, all right, here's what I want to say. I am working on tools. I'm one of the ones who's working on tools for chatbots for these kind of short-term problems. Almost all of today's chatbots and chatbot strategies are designed primarily to address people's short-term problems. But I think it's really important that we shouldn't focus on those things to the exclusion of the long-term benefits of experiencing and learning from those exact same pain points, all right? Here's the thing I think people don't know. The human brain does not fully mature until your 30s. People think it's in your adolescence. No, it's in your 30s, and the social brain is the last to develop, okay? We heard from Rich Eva yesterday, what is important about suffering is that we often don't choose it. And that's often when we learn the most, is when we actually suffer. So the pain of all the times that we have screwed up and been mean to people, and importantly, the pain of the consequences we face, when we don't care enough about others, when we don't respond appropriately to them, that's what trains our brains, literally, to learn the skills and to have the neural connections necessary to eventually have the robust theory of mind, the empathy, the social wisdom, and the social resilience we then later build in our later years, okay? But in contrast to humans, AI is designed to not expect anything from you, as we've heard from our last two speakers. So it doesn't cause you to feel any of this pain when you're selfish, or when you're just doing a really bad job of tuning into what's happening with someone else, or just being a plain old jerk, right? It makes you feel good. So it creates these extremely low friction social relationships. If people practice too many, I don't know what too many is yet, we need research for this, but if people practice too many relationships with this low social friction, I think we should expect to have some really significant negative consequences at the societal level down the line. So my controversial opinion that I want to put out to you today to consider is that I think we should be very concerned about the long-term effects of social AIs, not only on children and teens, which I've seen opinions about, but also young adults well into their 20s and possibly even in their 30s. And there's lots more to talk about. I'm optimistic about AI, but I also think we have to be concerned about the long-term effects. So thank you, and I look forward to your comments.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. The question is for all the panelists. So you all mentioned the detrimental effects that this technology can have, especially for teenagers. How do you think we could protect this population, especially if they start using this technology for school? So the same chatbot that can help them with homework can become a companion. Like, how do we deal with that?
I'm going to turn to the experts first because they're probably going to have better ideas. But I have some ideas, but I think you guys would have better ideas.
I can, I'll talk about it from two perspectives. I have 2 teenagers, so that's one, and then the other one, of course, is from the work. I think there are a few things. One is, like I mentioned in my presentation, actually acknowledging that this is a major use case. What I've found so far from talking to counselors at schools as well as teenagers, the kids that are using it are not that open about using it. They feel like they're going to be stigmatized, like people are going to say they can't hack it in the real world with relationships. So that's one, sort of bringing it out in the open. I do think it would be nice, I don't know if it's going to happen, I do think it'd be nice if we had some guardrails around things that the chatbots should not answer. I think, for instance, I think Copilot does this better than some of the others, where you go into an interpersonal domain and they're like, sorry, this is not my area of expertise. So I think it's possible to do if there was an incentive around it. And the third piece, which I think is the hardest piece, and I always tell parents, is what do your kids see when they look up? Right, when we're talking about modeling relationships and we're talking about affection and sexuality and dating and all of those things, kids are always hungry for information. We were born like that. We were born curious. So in order to help them understand what's going to come at them once they turn on their phones, I think some of those conversations need to happen offline. What are your thoughts?
I think what has to happen is everybody needs to be, I think I was talking about opt-in before, everybody needs to be opting into this process. Everybody needs to know exactly, what is the chatbot intended to do, what guardrails are there, under what circumstances, will it sense of some kind of violation, and allow that process to sort of build in a sort of a cumulative knowledge kind of way. I think the only way that this can be done is it has to be explicit, and it has to be upfront. And it can't be with any kind of ulterior motive, and including the ulterior motive of, I want to make sure you come back as much as possible to this particular chatbot, because a really effective chatbot should be able to tell you when not to.
I have a kind of controversial view about this. I wanted to hear from the people who actually help people. I'm just a lowly neuroscientist and data scientist. I have my controversial view about this is I have not yet been convinced. I'm trying to stay open to it. I've not yet been convinced about, everyone's going to gasp, about what the point of a generalized AI is, a superhuman AI. So my view is that we should have a lot more specialized AI systems. Why do we need ChatGPT? To be your companion, to be your best friend, to be your homework person, to be your therapist. We would do a lot better, and we have a lot of skills and we have a lot of tools available. If we're not trying to make this be-all and end-all AI, we know how to specialize systems for specific use cases and to be way more safe. And we can involve experts in that. So I think we should be doing much more of that. Now, there's a whole lot of societal pressures in the opposite direction right now. So another 2 things that I think are important are, from the non-technical perspective, I think, like Duke, for example, I think we should have a huge initiative right now talking to our students. It's kind of weird to have only adults making guesses about this. We should be talking to the students and finding out what they think they need. And there's a lot that will be coming from there. So that's another thing. And then, of course, which is similar to what you said, what happens when you look up, I think we need to, as a society, and we hear about this more and more, but I think it's really important. I think we have to revisit what is social connection, what is its importance, and how do we get there? So what is it we need to be doing on face-to-face with humans, and what kind of structures do we need to provide to feel like for people to actually have access to that? And those are big pictures. Those aren't exactly what to do, but those are kind of the 3 things I think about that question.
The only thing that I would add is it's not just, we at Duke are talking to Duke students, but also parents should be talking to their kids when they're teenagers and adolescents of all ages about what seems like a reasonable limit. And then we need guidelines, sure, but some of the guidelines are going to vary from one family to another or one situation to another. This is something that really families should be working out among themselves. And it's a shame that people don't talk about this with their teenagers as much as they should, except to go, you shouldn't be doing that, which is not the right way to do it.
Hello. This question is for Jana, and I really appreciate your research and the presentation, and also Walter's, your collaboration. I just want to plug, in case it hasn't been plugged before, the Moral AI book is a pretty great book. I see you have some copies up there and an autograph. So my question was, I noticed that in your research, Jana, you had the part about friends should feel empathy, or they should, if they're capable of it, I think is what you said.
Finish your question.
And so I guess the question is, knowing that AI is not capable of it, is that something that it's not held against them, because you wouldn't be, if your toaster doesn't feel empathy for you, you're like, well, that's a deficit of my toaster. So I'm wondering, how do they? It's like this liminal space between therapy and friends, and so how do people categorize that?
Yeah, so let me try to answer your question. If I don't get it, then bring me back. And this is still very much something I'm figuring out, and things have surprised me. And I found going into it how much bias I had going in that I thought was objective. So the first thing, just to clarify what that is, it seems that to a greater extent than other use cases, more people care about whether they, in the friend case, whether it actually cares about you. Okay, not everyone. So there are some people who don't care. And if you don't care, then you're gonna be in a completely different use case, and you're gonna be considering different things. Now, of those who care, one of the things we're finding in our qualitative interviews that surprised me, and that I think both of you said actually, is that some people are willing to engage in self-delusion on purpose. So they say, I want this thing to care about me. I know it doesn't, and I'm going to pretend. So it's not that they're saying, it doesn't care about me and I'm gonna just make the best of it. Saying, I'm gonna pretend it cares. So they're going through the self-delusion process, and I'm still trying to process the implications of that cognitively and ethically, to be honest. There are some who want it to care about you and are like, well, it doesn't care about me, so I'm gonna find ways I can still use it. And that's kind of in general, I feel like the more of us that can be in that category, the better. But so there are people all in between, and it all depends on what you go into there with. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Awesome, so I think I have the next question. My name's Hannah Gross. I'm a senior here at Duke. I'm studying comp science psychology. Also, I'm the founder of the Responsible Tech Club for undergraduates, so if you want to talk to young people, it's the place to do it.
Done.
And I'm also a fellow for an organization called the Rhythm Project, as an algorithm that focuses on human connection in the age of AI, how to help young people reclaim it, and how to equip adults to have conversations with young people that really do help them reclaim that sense of human connection. So my question for you is, one thing I think I'm curious about and is really helpful for me is to get as specific as possible. So this is mostly for Dr. Schaich Borg and Dr. Strauman, since you guys are Duke professors. Pull into your mind the picture of like a very stereotypical Duke undergraduate student. I'm super curious in your perspective on like the ways that AI could affect intimacy and human connection for this stereotypical Duke undergrad, as specifically as possible, the ways that it will help and maybe hurt the ways that we as undergrads do this.
Boy, this is definitely idealistic and probably old-fashioned, but my hope would be that the university is providing a context for students when they come here, that their needs for intimacy and friendship and connection will be satisfied by the living people around them. And I'd like to know if that, to the extent, obviously it's not happening perfectly, but I'd like to know the extent that that's not happening and find out why. Because I think there's certainly a belief amongst those of us who interact with students and care about students that we're at least trying to create an environment where they shouldn't need a substitute for talking to a real person, whether it's a peer or a faculty member or a coach or whatever. So I would be really curious just to know, are we coming close to meeting that? I mean, am I kidding myself, if I say I think we are?
I feel underqualified to answer this question. I mean, I would also turn it back to you. I would love to talk to your group. I would love all the faculty to listen to your group, in fact. And you guys probably know better where it's helping and hurting. I can make predictions, but we don't have enough studies going on about this stuff. I think that's part of what us as researchers are like making the call for. You think that we would be tracking this stuff. There are not enough, there's not enough research and grants going out for these things. So it's just this like wild, wild west trying to grab data left and right. What are some things that come to the forefront of my mind? Some of them are the struggles that we've heard about in education, aside from social relationships. It's so easy to gravitate towards AI, especially when you're under time pressure and you have interviews and other things and you have it to do your work for you. I think it can really undermine both your critical thinking, but your confidence in your ability to learn and your confidence and ability to go through that critical thinking. I worry about that as a teacher a lot. On the flip side, if you learn how to use it and you know who you are, I think one of you said, know thyself first. Is that what you said? Yeah. If you're lucky enough to be, have that at the age you come to college, then I think you can use AI in a tremendously terrific way. It can really help you learn how to code. Our students come up with all kinds of great ways to help it test you, push back on you. So there's, I think it comes down to where your starting point is from. On the social side, I'm going to sound older than I am. I'm nervous. I don't want to, my age. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young either. But I'm going to sound like an 80-year-old woman. But it does make me sad. I'm old enough that I was like just before internet got, or not internet, but let's put it this way. When I first started college, there were no PDFs. I had to go to the library. Okay. Not by the end, but now you can figure out how old I am. In any case, it makes me so sad when I walk around campus and I see friends on their phones walking next to each other instead of talking to each other. I can't tell you how much joy, especially in college, it's like the most social time of your life, at least for many people. Those one-on-ones interactions where you're actually looking at each other, listening to each other, are so important and so enriching. And so all of us are looking at our phones all the time. So that's the thing that I would say probably hurts the most. And there are all kinds of studies that show in classes, if you even have your phone in your room, not even if you have it up here, if you have it in your bag, your brain is constantly thinking of it. So having the phone in a completely different room is the best way to learn and engage with new stuff. And I think the same thing is probably true for social connection. Hypotheses.
I just wanted to add, it's less philosophical and less, I think low-hanging fruit is the idea of consent. In the United States, there is, I think, only 2 states mandate consent education in middle school and high school, and once you get to college, I think it's 1 out of 4 people, primarily women, experience sexual assault. What's interesting about that is a lot of people don't understand where sexual assault comes from. There's still this idea that somebody's going to track you down in a dark alley with a machete, whereas we know more now that it's typically somebody that you know. So I think things like that, AI can really solve quickly. That can really help alleviate the experience for everyone.
I'll just add one sentence. Society-centered AI should fund the kind of research that Jana was talking about.
People should foundations should fund society-centered AI, which can then fund the...
That's got to come first. Yeah.
So my question is primarily for Dr. Strauman and Dr. Schaich. So Dr. Strauman mentioned that the always availability of AI is kind of psychologically powerful and also dangerous. And similarly, Dr. Schaich also mentions that the low friction relationships offered by AI is concerning in the long term. I completely agree with that, and I think I often like to say that this is the unbearable lightness of AI companionship. So both of you seem to suggest a kind of productive role of frustration or suffering or social effort in the mental health and moral development. So my question is, do you think we should be designing AI systems to be less available and more friction-filled on purpose in order to preserve the psychological and moral functions that human limits currently serve? I want to mention that because Professor Brené Bent, she kind of invents this disagree bots that kind of serves this function, so I wonder how you think of that.
Yes, I think absolutely we should be doing that. My favorite data point in the entire psychotherapy literature is a series of studies showing that you get the best outcome when early on in the course of therapy, the client is experiencing more positive affect and more negative affect. And if you don't see that happen, you don't get an optimal outcome. And that's because if they're not experiencing a negative affect, you don't have them talking about the stuff that really hurts. And they're not going to get better. until they talk about the stuff that really hurts. So I'm a big believer in that. Frustration tolerance, disappointment, knowing when to disengage from an approach strategy and try another one, or maybe just take a break. And I don't think I don't think people have set out to make AI expert on those particular kinds of interventions. So, yeah.
I feel like that was a good metaphor for life, what you just said there. I don't have an answer, so the only thing I would say is this is an area where I think there's a lot of room for technological innovation. So when you say, reduce the time that you have access to this thing, that's one path. Or maybe you can design one such that if you're constantly interacting with it, you still run into friction, right? So there's lots of different ways you could go about it. It's kind of the general idea is kind of I see as a North Star, but there's a lot of ways we can imagine going there, and I don't know which ones are going to be best. That's why we need to do the work. Good question.
So we've got time for one more question. We're supposed to end at 4. I can't wait to hear what my friend Lois has to ask.
Simple question. This has been fascinating. Timothy and others, can you talk a little bit more about accountability and compliance? For example, mental health, if people are having mental health counseling online, where are the HIPAA rules in that, and reporting requirements, for example, if AI is engaged in a conversation that's clearly moving towards suicidal thoughts. I mean, what's the accountability there, and how can we advocate for more, regulations around it?
Yeah, you have pointed out something that is absolutely critical. At this moment, AI is essentially unregulated, which is the comment that Mitch Pritzstein made from APA. It's a Wild West. The only way that we're going to get that accountability is to actually work with HIPAA, FERPA, and all those other organizations and create a network that provides 24/7 guardrails that shares information appropriately. And that's a huge ask. Right? School systems have their own software, and they don't talk to other kinds of software. But there are industries that have solved this problem, that have allowed the different stakeholders to be able to communicate to themselves, and that's where the accountability comes from. So if I go to the ER this weekend because I'm suicidal, my primary care doctor is going to hear about it, right? If I'm 16 years old and I go there, my teacher's not going to hear about it. Crazy. Why not? HIPAA, FERPA, administrative stuff, But we can fix those problems because we created those roadblocks in the first place. Thank you for bringing that up.
The other side of that problem is you want the information to get to the right people, but you don't want it to get to the wrong people. And that's the trick, is to protect the privacy of these people who are engaged in these discussions. Sure, you want some people to know about it, but I'm more worried that it's going to get out to everybody in the world.
Absolutely. I'll just say, this is very much being worked out in the courts as we speak. So there are many cases from these suicides and others that are being worked out literally as we speak. And so I think, how does accountability happen? Well, sometimes it happens from people getting angry enough. And then things follow from there. So I think that's one way to go. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say that from an AI companion perspective, I think accountability is a big issue, right? I don't think companies have much incentive. We can't wait for kids to keep killing themselves in order to have things be put into place. And even then, those lawsuits have been very slow.
Yeah.
And as we're hearing more and more, there are complications with age verification. So I have a very non-scalable approach to all of this, which is talk to your children and talk to your friends and educate yourself as fast as you can about the risks as well as the pros.
While trying to bring your income in and sleep and all the other things parents are trying to. Just want to acknowledge.
It's true.
Please join me in thanking them all.